Reviewing this game is sad for many different reasons. For one, it reminds me of a very dark time in the SEGA Saturn's life, as Magic Knight Rayearth was the very last North American release on the Saturn. It's also sad because it was a turning point for SEGA as a company. By this point in 1998, there was no coming back. The choices SEGA made during the Saturn's brief lifetime would ensure the nail in the coffin, as they say. Within a few short years, SEGA would leave the hardware market and become a third-party developer. 1998 also only saw a few releases for the Saturn, and yes, they were all great games, but for fans such as myself, there was nothing else. So pretty much from late 1997 until the Dreamcast's launch in September 1999, we had almost nothing. From a business perspective, that was a horrendous move, as it alienated longtime fans, pissed off retailers and developers. It was a whirlwind of mistakes that would eventually culminate in SEGA ceasing to be the company we all once knew and loved. And even the excellent Dreamcast was just too little too late. The story of Magic Knight Rayearth is nowhere near as interesting as the real-world story of how Working Designs got the game released. The full tale is much too long for this review, but there were licensing issues with the characters' names from the anime, part of the source code was lost when Working Designs had a hard drive failure and had to rewrite an incredible amount of code for the game, there were fights internally between SEGA and Working Designs that essentially culminating in one of the most embarrassing E3s in history. And when all was said and done, only one small printing of the game was released because Working Designs promised their fans they would release the game. It was a complete and utter financial disaster for the company, who knew they were never ever going to make their money back. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how you cater to your fans. Another quick tidbit for you Saturn fans out there: of the original 12 Japanese titles that were revealed when the Saturn was originally announced at the Tokyo Game Show way back when, Magic Knight Rayearth was among those titles, and it was actually released in Japan in 1995. So it's very important that you keep that in mind as we discuss some of the somewhat primitive gameplay features in this game. This was actually one of the very first Saturn games, however it took ages for it to get released outside of Japan for all the different reasons I mentioned. Now, I'll always hold a special place in my heart for Victor Ireland and the guys at Working Designs. He and his team brought over Japanese titles no one else wanted to touch, released them in deluxe packaging, and found an incredibly passionate audience. For me, my Working Designs love affair dates all the way back to the TurboGrafx 16, but for most of you guys, it likely started with Lunar on the Sega CD or sometime after that. It's only fitting that this company, which I respected so much, would be the ones to release the very last Sega Saturn game in North America. And what a game it is. While I had hoped for a traditional RPG back when this game was originally announced, it's actually an action RPG that plays something like The Legend of Zelda, or on the Saturn, something like Shining Wisdom, although it's much more refined than that game. As usual, you can expect the same high-quality packaging, this time with 3 different versions of the game disc inside, so collectors beware which version you pick up, and the same quirky translation work Working Designs was known for. But Magic Knight Rayearth goes deeper than that. There's a substantial amount of voice acting, great anime cutscenes, and overall the game has a really nice coat of polish to it. It was a fitting end to one of the most underrated platforms of all time. Magic Knight Rayearth begins with Hikaru, Umi, and Fu taking a trip to the Tokyo Tower. Unbeknownst to them, they're about to get sucked into an adventure that will change their lives forever. Emerald, a powerful princess, has been sealed away by the evil and dark Lord Zagat. Clef, the most powerful wizard in all of Sephiroth, at the behest of Emerald, teaches the girls powerful magical abilities once they're teleported to Sephiroth by Princess Emerald herself. Their mission is to defeat Zagat and free Princess Emerald at all costs. There's a bit more to it than that, but I want to leave something for you to discover should you ever play the game. I should note that the game features all of the characters from the first story arc of the original anime. The gameplay is very similar to that of a 16-bit action RPG. Again, recall that this game was made in 1995, so it only makes sense that the gameplay would be somewhat reminiscent of games from the time. You control one of 3 girls at any given time and can swap to the others by using the L or R buttons. A shoots your primary weapon, B allows you to jump, and C uses your magical attacks. As the game progresses, you learn extra or new magical attacks, and you can cycle between those with the Z button. Some monsters will be weaker against certain types of attacks, so cycling between the 3 girls is absolutely necessary. There's more strategy involved when it comes time to upgrade your health and magic points, as often you'll find certain orbs that grant an increase to 1 or 2 of these elements, but only one of the girls can get this upgrade. So you really have to make sure you either balance out your characters or put the points to the character that you like to use the most. Either way, your team will level up over time and become quite powerful, so it really is a matter of personal preference. Hikaru uses a sword that has a rather short striking distance, and I'll be honest, I find that the hitbox is a little bit large in this game, and it's very easy for her to take damage as she's trying to attack other enemies. Umi uses a longer fencing sword, and personally I find her a better character to use over Hikaru. And Fu uses a bow and arrow ranged attack, and personally that was always my personal preference. I always stuck with Fu. Magical attacks vary based on the character, but include everything from healing magic to elemental attacks such as fire, water, and wind, etc. You can also carry healing items and a few extra goodies throughout your adventure. For the most part, you move from one village to the next and one dungeon to another, pushing the story forward and slowly increasing your own abilities and powers. The presentation is great, and especially when you consider the age of the game, it's impressive. Sprites look fantastic, special effects look great, and even the anime cutscenes, while grainy, look good. The only downside to the graphics is the inexplicable frame rate drops. I understand working designs not really having the ability to go in and change that aspect of the game, because they were primarily focusing on localization, but it's still weird because the 2D games on the Saturn are much more impressive than this. But again, if this was one of the, not launch titles, but very early titles for the Saturn, that kind of makes sense. The audio is also really impressive, and I always was impressed by the sheer amount of spoken dialogue in this game. Games of the time just didn't feature this amount of voice acting. Working designs hired competent actors for the localization, and naturally some are better than others. Overall, Knight Rayearth is a really depressing game to talk about, even though it's an extremely fun game to play. It has its fair share of problems, but ultimately it's well worth hunting down a copy for a decent price. That's much easier said than done. Currently, Knight Rayearth is one of the most sought-after North American Saturn releases because of both its rarity and the fact that it's a good game. Much like Panzer Dragoon Saga and Shining Force 3, you need to ask yourself if it's truly worth the asking price. I can't answer that for you, but what I can say is I'm very happy to have this one in my collection, and happier still to have experienced it back in 1998 when it was originally released. It was the last of its kind, the last working designs game on a SEGA platform, and the swan song for the Saturn. What a way to go out.
Magic Knights, I summon.